100% pure logic. Science cannot prove or disprove the existence of any entity or entities which are not physical. Hence it follows that if there really is an indestructible, eternal, non-transformative spiritual dimension to reality, then it cannot be proven to exist nor disproven by scientific methods of detection, observation, and measurement. Thus, it is not a truly scientific opinion to think that there is for certain only one dimension of reality, in effect, the physical universe void of any spiritual dimension. And while science cannot prove or disprove the existence of a spiritual dimension to reality, whatever the nature of that spiritual dimension may be, it cannot exist in such a way as to deny scientific facts and conclusions. Thus, whatever the nature of the spiritual dimension, it cannot exist in such a way that contradicts scientific facts and proofs. And just because a spiritual entity or entities is able to connect with physical things, quanta, atoms, molecules, etc., does not mean that it is part physical. While none of what I have just stated can be proven or disproven by any scientific means, it does not follow that it is logical to conclude that my stated views are illogical and thus unscientific. The anti-scientific illogical mindset of those who are dogmatic, in effect religious, is no different than the illogical unscientific mindset that falsely reasons that only physical things can exist, both of which are forms of illogical narrow-mindedness. Thus we come to the understanding that there is a logical alternative to being either religiously dogmatic or materialistically nihilistic. That logical alternative is being scientific and spiritual. Fenyo's rule: the absence of evidence for a certain speculative notion, such as an indestructible spiritual entity, does not mean that such a speculative notion is inherently incorrect. Now that we've got all that clarified and accepted as fact, let us apply it to some of the most important scientific and spiritual questions. Are we really just physical phenomena with strictly temporal existence, as all nihilistic materialists want us to think? Scientific reason dictates that sense of self-being cannot be strictly dependent on the physical structure of our brains, given the constant instability of things at the subatomic level of physics. If we are brained bodies which house spiritual entities, does that also mean that there is an omnipotent, omnipresent, omniscient, supreme entity we call God? The short answer is no. If there is an entity that our released spiritual entities can become one with, then such an entity's nature must be in accordance with the scientific facts and conclusions. If God exists, then God cannot have created the infinite universe of finite sub-universes. No entity can create everything. Hence, any real God is not omnipotent. If God exists, then God cannot be physically perfect. Otherwise, everything would be God, including all the horrific, terrible, and insensible things that exist and or happen. And for God to be omniscient, God would need to be physically perfect. Hence, God cannot know everything. If God were everywhere, omnipresent, then no one would ever do anything to harm God's other creatures. But the real world is full of thoughts and actions which lack an awareness of God. God is either truly spiritually perfect, in effect all good and all loving, and thus against all initiated acts of violence, or God doesn't exist at all. God's ability to help us and provide us with a sense of what is ethical and what is unethical is limited to our ability to accept the real God, who is only a spiritual entity whose ability to intervene in the physical dimension of reality is limited by our own limitations. For all God really can do is through us. The illogical idea and concept of a God who would ever command or condone any act of violence that is not strictly in self-defense is antithetical to everything we sense God should be like. Either God is good and all-loving, or God does not exist. Did God create us? No and yes. In other words, God did not create us in the anti-scientific manner that many believe, as if absolute creation of something out of nothing could ever be possible. It is not. But God is our common spiritual entity that entered into the physical dimension of this planet and began evolving life. Evolution is scientific fact. Is there such a thing as reincarnation? There is no way we can be absolutely certain that there isn't such a thing as being born into a new life after this current one. So, it is unscientific and anti-spiritual to think it is okay for the world to continue to engage in so much horrific suffering, so much war, crime, and corruption. Could you be wrong about everything you have stated here? While you may find this hard to accept, I really put myself through tons of real deep and multidisciplinary thinking, and I have no doubt that my statements are logical and very likely to be correct. If you are a full-time atheist or part-time religious person, don't waste my time. If this video has seriously benefited you, please share it with others. Otherwise, I'm more than happy to debate these things with you. Thank you.